Hello, everybody. Welcome to Headhunters Live. This is David Stephen Patterson. Most people just call me DSP. And we have a great show today with Greg Fischer, founder of Well Oil Machine. He's going to be talking to us about offshore teams. But before we bring him on, I'd like to introduce my co-host, my most handsome co-host, Mr. Chris Wessel. How you doing, Chris?
Well, at the moment, I am currently the best looking co-host you have. I'm also the only co-host you have, so it's probably not too hard to keep that spot. With Neil not around, I have no competition. So I did not shave this morning because I have a lot of beard competition between you and our guest coming in, and the hair, forget it. Like this guy's LinkedIn profile, like the flowing locks and stuff. Like wow. It's a good thing Neil's not here. Actually, he'd probably be really. It'd be tough for him.
It'd be tough. Well, yeah, that's true. Our guest has lots of flowing locks. He's also a very sexy man. And by the way, Chris, just so you know, the ladies love facial hair. You may want to grow out a beard. The wife may love it. I'm just saying
about that. We'll see.
I'm just saying and also it's great if you start gaining weight. It's like sweatpants for your face, But, anyway, so we're gonna bring Greg on here in a minute. Like I said, he is he's all things offshore. So if you want to hire offshore talent, whether you want to provide it to your clients or want to hire offshore people yourself, great person to talk to. Before we bring him on, though, I do want to have you guys, if you guys are watching this live, please comment live down below. If you're watching the replay, please comment replay because you want to see who's watching and helps the algorithm. So give us a like, give us a love, comment, share the show with everybody that you know. And I like to talk about our sponsor for just one moment before we bring Greg in. So let's start off with Back Office Staffing Solutions. Now, if you're in direct hire, retain, contingency, whatever it happens to be, and you want to start smoothing out your revenue and actually start placing contractors or temp staff, temporary staffing, whatever you want to call it, fractional, for example, reach out to backofficenow.com. This is Neil's company, full disclosure. But if you don't have to deal with the workers' comp and the insurance and the payroll funding, which can really get you, as well as have basically a turnkey system where you can have the actual system your candidates can actually log into, complete their time cards, automatically sent to your client with billing. They handle the entire thing front to back. So go to backofficenow.com, book a call, tell them we sent you. In fact, Chris is a client as well.
I am. I've been using Boss for a couple of years now, and if I can figure it out, you definitely can. And listen, as someone who had a staffing firm for 10 years that did, factoring and then eventually self-funding, and you got to pay. You got your workers' comp, you got your quarterly tax filings, you've got workers' comp audits, you've got all that shit. And I still had to have an infrastructure for doing timesheets. There's a lot that goes into it that I wouldn't go back. I would use Neil all day long.
Same as I don't recruit Neil any longer, but I used to run my own payroll, run my own workers' comp and all that. It is a pain in the ass, a royal pain in the ass. So if you can get a company like Neil's do it, and he does that at a great rate, go for it. Now, for me, I run a company called the Digital Headhunter. Many of you already know, but in essence, we build out sales marketing systems. It's a done-for-you service, so we actually build out the entire thing for you, so you don't have to worry about banging your head against the wall trying to figure out your tech stack. How do I handle Clay? What about my outbound automation? What about linked automation? How's it all tying together? What about my content generation? We handle everything for you. Go to realdsp.me/system to check that out. There's a 14-minute video on there explaining exactly why it works. And if any of you want a cool little download for free, go to realdsp.me/AI-proof. On there, I've got about a 49 page guide on how to, in essence, AI proof your recruiting service. So with all that being said, let's bring on the man of the hour, and that would be Greg MFN Fischer. What is up, Greg?
Hey, man! I got Neil for coming up with possibly the best acronym for a company ever.
Is what?
Boss.
Yeah.
Oh, boss. Yeah, but I tell you, I think of with Neil, like, and it really kind of pissed me off because he came out with boss. I'm like, dude, your marketing should be about being a boss recruiter, a boss search firm, bosses, and he never liked it. He never did it. I get like it's so like it's just right there. Be a boss recruiter. He never, to this day, he won't do it.
Recruit like a boss.
Yeah.
Handle payroll like a boss. I don't know.
Maybe that was too cheesy. I don't know. But
I love it. Yeah. When I came up with well-oiled machine, I quickly realized it went to WOM, and I got so much shit from all my friends for that. They're like, WOM? WOM?
What does WOM mean? What does WOM stand for anything?
Like, WOM.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a great name. It's a great name for a firm. I mean, World Machine. And when I first saw them, I'm like, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah,
it's a great name. Well, great. So for our audience who may not know who you are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Greg Fischer. I'm the founder of Well-Oiled Machine. We are one of the weirdest, most niche search firms you'll hear of. So we're rec to rec, meaning we recruit recruiters for recruitment firms with a specialty in hiring offshore and nearshore talent.
Excellent.
So how does that differ from, because of course I saw, if someone looks through what you have going on in your LinkedIn and stuff, they'll see there's a little bit more nuance to this. But like, how is that different than hiring a VA? Because I think when people hear offshore, nearshore resources, especially in the world of all the spam you get about quote unquote RPO services, all this other stuff, how is what you do different, and why is it a better way to go?
Great question. So we're a completely different model from a VA, and I think VAs have their time and place. What I found in scaling my last company is that an individual is most successful when they're in a highly specialized role. And so, if you try to hire somebody to do 10 different things, they might be able to do them, but they're probably not going to be able to do them very well. And so where we've found a lot of success is getting in with an agency, figuring out the exact function. Maybe it's sourcing, maybe it's sales research, maybe it's an actual full cycle recruiter, and then going and hiring somebody who's world-class at doing that.
Now, there's obviously going to be a bit of what I'm looking for. So there's a certain view of offshore recruiters. Like, for example, I know in IT, for example, I know a lot of US IT guys that if they get a call from an Indian or Pakistani recruiter, they're like, I'm not interested, right? Because there's that perception that they're scammers out there, and so how do you avoid that? Because I know that's a big thing right now, has been, at least in my experience. How do you get around that?
Yeah, well, couple aspects of that. So one, I think the reason why most people have such a bad experience is it's typically very low level talent. So most of the time, those recruiters are employed through an agency, like an RPO or a staffing agency, where at best, half of what they get paid, often even less, is going to that individual. Now, for an agency to make that work, they're typically getting the lowest level of talent that'll accept the least amount of money to be able to do that work. It's the same thing in the US. Like, could you imagine scaling a firm where your US-based recruiters are staffed through another agency? Like, I haven't heard of somebody who does that because the talent isn't there. So
there's too much layers. There's not enough room in there for anyone to make any money and be any good.
Yeah, exactly. And there's not true ownership, because the owner of the recruitment firm goes, hey, this agency is going to handle training and management, but that agency doesn't live in your world. It doesn't live in my world. So they also don't understand what high performance looks like. So that's part of the model, is you're just typically dealing with low level talent. And then the other is location. So one of the things, yes, like somewhere like India, Pakistan is great from a cost standpoint, but there is going to be an accent there. And for some roles, that doesn't matter. For other roles, it does. And so that's actually a big thing we like to do, is say, let's be really intentional and figure out, what do you need this person to do? And maybe if it's getting on the call with like an executive in the US, then it's saying like, what skill set do you need in terms of communication skills? And so maybe it means going to Mexico where you have fluent English.
So you're helping them to figure out, based on what they're trying to accomplish, like where might be the best places to source talent based on the pools that might be available in different countries and the going rates for them and this and okay. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we have a client who's like, it has to be zero accent. We're like, let's go find a US expat living in Mexico.
Right.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, although I will say Mexico might not be the best place to live right now, for a few reasons. I had funny enough, I had a client, or one of my clients. I was on a call with him a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Hey, I'm about to go to Mexico for about a weekend ago for a vacation." And I'm like, Puerto Vallarta, because I believe that's where a lot of this like stuff's happening. He's like, no. I'm going to for what you said. We mentioned this other part of Mexico that's actually relatively safe. But I gotta imagine like living in Mexico right now is probably not ideal for U.S. expats, depending on the area, considering the cartels and whatnot.
Yeah, you know what? One of my team members, our internal recruiters, lives in Guadalajara, in like the center of all this. And it sounded gnarly the first couple of days. She said it was almost like COVID times, where there was just this like eeriness in the air, and the streets were just empty. But it sounds pretty normal now.
Well, and it's crazy too when you have people working for you in other parts of the world. Because like I have a longtime employee who lives in Caracas, and the morning after that got bombed, I was like, you're all right down there before I send you anything to work on. Just like, how are things going, right? Because you got to think about that stuff when you have people in other countries, which actually leads to a question. When you are hiring for, like, let's say a recruiting firm in the US or wherever is decided, okay, we're going to work with you to find some talent in one or more countries, right? Are you employing them and contracting it to them? Or is this more of a direct hire type of situation where you get it all set up for them, but they employ them, and maybe there's a vehicle through which they employ them? Because like I know you still have to have some kind of contracting mechanism if you're gonna. You can't just W-2 somebody who's living in whatever country. So like, what does that look like? What's that model?
Yeah, so we operate in a direct hire model.
Okay,
just
you get them set up and they take it from there. Okay.
Yeah, but we typically guide them through it. So we go through like, hey, here are a couple different ways to do it. Here's a contract template. I think we think of it as this big, crazy, overwhelming thing. It's pretty easy to get set up, and we help them out with it.
But that's good though, because then you can guide them. You can demystify it, right? Like they might be like, oh, that seems like it might be a lot of trouble. And you're like, actually, in that country, here's what you do. Boom, boom, boom. Here's your checklist. There you go. Okay.
Like we recently switched payroll partners for our team, and it took 30 minutes to set up.
Okay. Now, I know that a lot of offshore or these countries like Mexico or South America just in general, Philippines, you got South Africa. These are sites of countries I see a lot of offshore teams being in, right? What market is better for a recruiter who's actually going to be talking on the phone, actually speaking to people? So, because I'd imagine you want more technical work done, there's probably certain areas that are better for that versus more client-facing or candidate-facing work. What's going to be your best country to recruit in for something like that?
Assuming if we're talking Europe, South Africa, Nigeria are great. Time zones aligned. There's a lot more cultural alignment. If we're talking US, for phone-based roles, Latin America, probably 9 out of 10 times.
Really?
With that, Brazil is number one. It's by far the largest talent pool out there. It's a very mature economy. Yeah, you have any big name search firm you've heard of has an office there. Korn Ferry, Michael Page, all of them. So you have super experienced recruiters who know how to run a desk, and a very high level of education. And then Air Swift is a big one. They hire former English teachers. Then do the recruitment in North America, so they speak great English. Mexico would be my number 2.
Really interesting. Okay, Brazil, I didn't realize that. So what about pay? So if you hire somebody, and let's say in Brazil, for example, I mean, normally for like most recruiters here in the U.S., you pay them either like maybe a draw versus commission or something along those lines, and they may be making, depending upon the pay scale, like 35 to like 45% of what they bill, right? I'd imagine it's probably not the same model. I guess the cost of living is so much lower, right? So I'd imagine you're on a per deal basis, you're paying far less than that, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. So if we're talking like a 180 recruiter, who can work pretty high level positions, you usually get a base salary. On the low end for a good 180 recruiter, it could be right around $2,000 base. On the high end, for a really high performer, you might see as high as like 3,500, 4K.
Is that a month?
Per month, yeah. Interesting, in Latin America, they always think in monthly terms. Latin America tends to be a little less commission heavy, which is always an interesting challenge to find somebody who's happy to be in a more commission-oriented environment. But yeah, you're usually looking 2 to 3K base, and then throw in 1 to 3K monthly commission, depending on performance.
Well, and so that's the other thing too. It's interesting. Like, let's say you have a country where there's less of the commission focus, right? But they can be very effective recruiters. Now you got to help this recruiting firm that maybe could find talent there, but is used to managing a commission-driven environment more. Maybe they have to learn like how to get good productivity out of this population of folks that isn't driven by that, but is maybe driven by other things. Like, do you have to think about like those kind of like cultural clashes and like incentive alignment and like that kind of stuff? I mean, it's very interesting.
I think this is one of the reasons why you can't just go online and post a job and expect to strike. It does exist. And so, yeah, I have to think about that. But to me, I want to find somebody who works within the agency's model and culture, which to your point is less common. But yeah, it does take a lot of digging. Typically, we have to do a lot of headhunting. We can't just like post a job ad and find that individual.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
So what about management? So, I mean, how do you manage folks? I mean, you know, manage someone remote is obviously a challenge. Manage somebody how to manage different countries is even more of a challenge. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that companies make, that maybe first time firm owners that are trying offshore for the first time? Like, what are the mistakes they're making, and how do they manage somebody who's in another country? Like, how do they do that?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is like, as a business owner, we're in pain all the time, right? We're dealing with just a ton of shit, anxiety about the world, trying to build a business, and we're always looking for easy buttons. And I think the biggest mistake I see is that somebody's like, oh, you've sourced before, you've recruited before, great, go do it. And just treating it like this easy button. But like, just like hiring somebody in the US, it's not like, it takes the same level of performance management that you'd put into any other employee.
How do you vet these guys? Because again, I'd imagine, again, being in another country, I'd imagine it's probably hard to vet these folks. There's like background checks or reference checks. How do you vetting these people, or how should you vet them?
Yeah, it's definitely harder. Well, I'll say one of the things for anybody trying to do this on their own is you have to pay attention to communication gaps a lot more, because what you will see sometime is maybe somebody who presents pretty well and does a lot of head nodding to try to show that they understand what you're saying. And I tend to have people cue in a lot more to, if you asked a very broad, open-ended question, that they fully get what you're trying to say, which is less of a problem in the US. Otherwise, I think, here's the thing, like, anybody can BS their way through something. And that's the same in the US. Like, anybody can lie about their numbers or produce fake numbers. I think for me, can you do a background check or references? We do sometimes. I think the biggest thing is using practical tests. So what we'll do, for instance, like, let's say it's a full cycle recruiter. In the late stages of interviewing, we will give them the recording of an intake call with the hiring manager, and then the recording of a call with a candidate, and for that search, and then have them go and assess the call and said, hey, how did you understand the search? Like, tell me what we're looking for here, maybe even go write some content for this, and then like go break down the call. And so I tend to focus much more on testing the actual skill sets, which you can't really BS your way through.
So how so though? I mean, do you actually have them call candidates live? Is it like along those lines? Like giving them actual real work to do, right?
I think I haven't quite gone that far though. That would be an interesting test. Usually it would be like, hey, here's the intake call, go write your outreach copy, or go record a video pitch of what you would say getting on the phone with a candidate.
Because you want to see the comprehension. Did they get to did they read between the lines? Or are they coming back to you saying, here's what I got from that, but also I'm not clear on what about this, what about this, what about this? And the questions that they ask you probably tell you if they really know their stuff, because they would know to ask that, right?
Yeah. Or here's a call that the recruiter did on the search. I want you to tell me what they did well and what they missed, and like rate this candidate on a certain scale. And you can kind of start to get inside their head and see how they're looking at recruitment.
Right.
When you mentioned I think one of your pieces that you put out there, I forget where I saw it, but I remember specifically seeing it, and you talked about wicked good talent, right? I remember seeing that, which by the way, which is more of like a Boston sort of like term. It's not really like a Denver sort of term, wicked. But anyway, I digress. But how do you well, I guess, how do you find it, but how do you assess that? Because I guess one thing to, again, do that assessment, but like, I don't know, like, in my experience, search firms, like, the recruiters are the worst for actually recruiting for their own teams. You know what I mean? Like, which is ironic. Yeah, it is kind of ironic. But how do you determine someone's like that wicked good? Like, how do can you actually assess that? Especially if you can't see them in person, especially if you can't, like, it's got to be tough, right?
Yeah, I like to test a few things. So one of them is hunger, and just how badly do they want it. And part of that is digging into their why. I also like to hear about the hardest times people have had in life. Like, I want to hear about a time professionally or personally where they were really down, and how resilient are they? Because we know in recruitment, there's going to be a ton of that. I like to do the practical test that we talked about. I also like to give direct feedback, because coachability is so big. Like, nobody's going to come in perfect. And like, at some point I'm going to go, hey, Chris, here's this thing you said. There was a big part of this work. There's a big miss here. I want to talk about that miss and how I do it differently, and like on the spot, see if they can handle that feedback.
Now, I remember this guy. I'm not going to say his name. I still remember his name from years ago. This is back in maybe the mid 2000s, right? So I used to work SAP. That was my niche, and I knew this guy. He's a real shitbag. Excuse my French, but he was a sales rep, right? And but what he would do is he would go get a job making 90, 100K, 120K at this. Usually it was like a foreign consulting company, like an Indian company or whatever. And then he would charge him, like, again, 100, 120 grand a year to run sales for them here in the US. And he'd probably rack up 4 or 5 jobs at a time. And then he get fired from one for non-performance after 6, 7, 8 months. He'd get picked another one, but at any given time, he'd have 4 or 5 of these things running simultaneously. Real shitbag move. But he was very proud of it at the time. And granted, this is before LinkedIn, so it was probably more possible back then, because now it'd be really hard to do. But I imagine there's still probably people out there that are doing that, and I imagine that is a real risk for offshore folks. So if I'm thinking about bringing on an offshore recruiter, how can I make sure they're not doing that to me?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, this has happened to me, by the way, one of the biggest things is like the employment model and where you're looking. So like, if you're going on Upwork, where people are accustomed to having to juggle 3 jobs because nobody will be like, here's a monthly salary, that's going to happen way more on there. If you employ somebody through an agency, well, they're the agency's employee, and it's not uncommon for the agency to go, maybe I can charge for full-time, but split them across a couple of clients. So I think there's two things. One is employing somebody directly and giving them a monthly salary, so they tell you, like, hey, here's my monthly nut. I need a salary that covers this. And they provide that. Like, first of all, now you just take away some of the reason for that. The other thing is track record. So for us, I would say 90% of the hires that we make are from an established big name agency. So like, if somebody has been doing it for 3 years at Michael Page in Brazil, like, Michael Page in Brazil is not going to let him get away with that, right? So there's a little baked in there.
That's a good point. Okay. Yeah. I imagine that is a risk that is out there. And again, for me, that probably be my biggest concern. Well, apart from that, like, what sort of mistakes do search firms make? So when they hire somebody in, once they're hired, like, how do you manage them, and how can you do so without making any, like, big mistakes, right? Because I'd imagine it's probably different than I'd imagine somebody here locally, right? So like, walk through, like, how do you actually do that?
Well, and you also went through some of this learning curve yourself too, right? So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, when I first got into this, I was running $1 million agency, kind of split a million directions. We were profitable, but like, I wasn't living in a mansion. And so we didn't want to we needed to hire to be able to grow. We didn't want to just spend a bunch of money on like a US based salesperson and wait 6 months to see if we get a positive ROI. So we went offshore. And the first probably 4 times it didn't work out well. And I think a lot of it was not being clear on what we needed in the first place and looking in the wrong place. So like, we were like, oh, we need somebody to source and we don't want to put in any work. So we went and hired some of these RPOs that email us every single week who were like, oh, we know healthcare recruitment, which was my industry. And of course they didn't. We spent so much time just trying to get them to figure out what to use. So after a while, we were like, let's go manage these people ourselves, but we were hiring freelancers. So we dealt with a lot of the same reliability issues. Eventually what we figured out is, I would actually argue DSP, a lot of it is treating it just like your onshore team. And I think a lot of the places where people go well is they're like, well, this person's in another country. I don't trust them. So I'm going to monitor their screen and see how many times they're clicking every day. And it's like, man, if my boss did that to me, I'd be like, first of all, this guy's kind of an asshole. Second, like, he doesn't trust me. I don't trust him. Right. So I think a lot of it is actually coming in and saying like, I'm going to put a lot of time into training, maybe even a little bit more training because you might come from a slightly different, and we're going to do regular performance management. And I'm always going to come up with some sort of performance standard that I can manage you to. Because at the end of the day, I don't care if you're like having a long lunch or working a little bit weird hours, like as long as you deliver results. And so I think the biggest thing is like, get clear on measurable outcomes like placements, resumes sourced, whatever it is, and then subjective outcomes. Like you need to be able to create written content that's at least a B+. And if you create those clear standards, you hold them accountable to that.
Well, I think actually I had a client tell me this once. So that was really, really clever. When he talked about you want to retain people and to make sure that they were like committed, he said there's really 2 things: high pay, high standards, right? Pay them really well and have extremely high standards.
Yeah.
He's like, that's the secret right there. You know what I mean? If they want to continue to get paid well, they have to hit the standards and be willing to fire them quickly. And now it's his whole thing: high pay, high standards, basically, in essence. And I imagine having high pay is easier if you're hiring in Mexico or Brazil, for example. I'm curious though. You know, you have, I have to imagine there's probably some cultural differences, right? Do this come into play at all in the work that you do? And if so, like how do you mitigate that if it comes into play at all?
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of it is like being really intentional about where you're hiring. So you're like, hey, I have this person on the phone with high level executives. They have to really be culturally fluent because they're going to lose credibility fast. Like, you go hire somebody who lived in the US for half their life and then now lives in Mexico, right? So like, I think first you can avoid that. And I think it's important to be clear on how much that matters. And then that should be part of your screening process too. There's always going to be like, or often will be some things that are pretty small. Like in Latin America, everybody talks monthly salary, not annual salary. Yeah. And like sometimes terminology is different. Like they use commercial as a term instead of business development. So like those things are pretty small and easy to work through. But I think the number one thing is spending time understanding their world. Like Chris, like you were saying, even checking in and like really trying to understand. Like one of my favorite questions is like, let's say it's somebody who lives in the Philippines. How do you show up differently when talking to an American than talking to a Filipino? And you learn so much from those questions. And sometimes there's really big differences and people are aware. Sometimes they're not aware. But you really have to dig in to kind of see where they're at with that.
Interesting. Well, I know that, well, let me ask you this. So in terms of like the work output, the actual production level, what are the differences between, let's say, an American hire versus an offshore hire? Again, from a production level, because again, they're offshore, they're not here, they're not actually sitting in the office. So do you see much of a production fall off between someone who's working, again, that remote sort of situation versus somebody who's in the office?
Depends on the role. So if we're talking sourcer, I would say I find the same performance if you hire really intentionally, sometimes even better. Like I love hiring in the Philippines for sourcers. And I remember talking to one of our long tenured employees. He'd been there 3 or 4 years, Claude. And I was like, Claude, like, how do you feel about the work? Like, do you find this really boring? Because I was like, I couldn't spend 24/7 doing this. And he's like, the only path to perfection is repetition. And I'm like, man, you were born for this. So like somebody like Claude would probably actually outperform me with a lot of that work. Now, when it comes to full cycle recruitment, I would say you can get on par if you go out and hire a really high level talent. On average, it's a lot lower, but it can be on par. Probably the one place where it's lower is business development. It's really, really rare to get somebody who can sell on the same level. So like I would say for easy math, sourcer should be on par. 180 recruiter, I would say 80 to 100% of what your US based team does. Sales, you're probably looking like 60 to 70% performance on average.
Really? Okay, I can see that. I can see that. Yeah, I think especially with the language barrier, and not that there will be a language barrier, but I can see that if there's like a thick accent, also that can affect things because, it's so hard. I mean, BD is so hard right now because there's the market's saturated. Manage to get hit up, 5, 6, 7, 10 times a day by recruiters all saying the exact same thing. So I guess it's hard to get noticed. Although I will say, if there's the one accent I think will do really, really well is a female English accent. I've always said if I were to hire a salesman from another country, it'd be an English woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just that's like the one I think that is really well more than anybody else.
Well, and it's not even just too, like, besides like the kind of, I guess, language barrier, there's also just, even if you're in the US selling and you're not really familiar with the market that you're selling to, geographically, industry, vertical, whatever, like you're at a disadvantage when you do a sales call with somebody in leadership, right? Because if you're talking to someone in a space that you can kind of quickly establish some credibility. But even if you're an American calling into some territory, industry vertical, whatever you don't know a lot about, you're already at a disadvantage. So now if you're also in another country, even further removed from that industry or geography, like that's got to be an obstacle too, in terms of like the rapport building and credibility that comes with like the BD side of things. Get away with it a little more with the recruiting because you have a job to talk about. But I think it's got to be it's got to make it very challenging. So that 60% I think is actually probably kind of impressive. I thought it would be worse.
Yeah. And you know what? Usually when you find somebody who can perform at that level, like I know a guy, he comes from a big name agency. He was at Hayes for a while. He sells into the US, did typical year would be $400,000 as a full cycle recruiter. So solid numbers, like any US agency, you'd be happy for that. But he studied the hell out of it. He studied that market. He studied the inside and out. Like I know a guy who said, I would go on YouTube every single day and go watch a South Park episode. And then I would go to the comments and try to get to the point where every single comment, I understood the reference. And like, that's how you overcome that gap. But it's rare.
Yeah. That's
learning the language from South Park. It's pretty cool, by the way. Oh man. I would imagine if I'm talking to somebody and they pronounce the word authority, I'm like, okay, you're in anyway, what about like legal and compliance and whatnot? Because I know that so I know that I had an experience. Well, at one point I was looking to hire someone from Ireland, and I had set up some stuff with a company called Deal, which does international payroll. So if you're looking to hire somebody. Now, granted, I've got other people that just pay their reps or their offshore people just via PayPal, just pay them directly via PayPal, right? And I've seen that as well. How should this be set up to do it right so you're not getting in trouble with Uncle Sam or the equivalent in their country?
Yeah. And thankfully, you're not going to have to worry about too much from Uncle Sam. But yeah, the equivalent can be something. There's 2 routes to go, and I'll tell you what's the totally compliant route and then what almost everybody does. So the compliant route is you go through an EOR, like Boss. You use the Boss equivalent in that country. Somebody like Deal can be a provider of that. And they walk you through like they have an HR person and they're like, if you want to fire them or do this or that, here's how you remain legally compliant. They file everything. Now, if I'm being real, that's maybe 5% of my clients because you now have to pay a huge amount of burden. You have to pay overtime if they work a local holiday, even if they want to. Most individuals tend to hire them as a contractor. And like Deal, most people hired through Deal or hired through Upwork are hired as contractors. If you go that route, the biggest thing I would recommend is like get an ironclad contractor agreement that spells a lot of stuff out and gives you some protection. And then you put them through that platform. You are technically taking some risk, now like the odds of Brazil going after Chris for having one person who's not technically like a properly employed there is incredibly low. Like their government's not going to see it. That individual is benefiting because no taxes come out of their paycheck. So it ends up being a win-win. And yeah, the honest reality is it perfectly legally compliant? No, it's a bit of a gray area, but because everybody's winning, nobody's complaining about that.
Well, I am a taxationist theft sort of guy anyway, so you know where I land on the issue. My coffee cup says I like my coffee black and my tea in the harbor. So there you go. But the one thing I will say, so for me, I kind of do it with my Philippine team. I just pay them directly, and they handle their own taxes and whatnot, which is great. But the one thing I will say that helps me out a lot, at least for my people, is that I treat them like employees. So they get vacation time, they get sick leave, they get their birthday paid off, they get all the American holidays, paid time off, they get Good Friday off, they get like I think if they're employee of the month, they get a day off there, and they get annual, or actually I take it raises every 6 months. I get a raise, right? And I've got, for my team, I've got incredibly long tenure. I mean, the person who's been the longest on that team has been like with me for 6 years. Which is incredibly long for an offshore team. Yeah, but just because I pay well, and I still pay way below market rate for it here in the U.S. But again, I treat them like employees. I don't know if that's your advice as well, but one thing I find that really helps is that you treat them like you're real employees, like in vacation time, all that kind of jazz. They feel appreciated. They feel like it's like a real job, and then it makes it worth it because I also have high standards. So if I'm demanding, right, again, high pay, high standards, right,
higher expectations,
et cetera, and they grow more. I think a lot of it too, they want to grow. And so I think a lot of it is giving them opportunities to, like, for example, like with my guys, I'll buy them a course, an online course, or actually my one of my project managers is getting his PMP. Actually, I think about, he just got his PMP, I believe, right? So now he's a pimp officially, but just got his PMP because he's trying to become a better project manager. And I think that stuff's really important for offshore teams. So I'd imagine you probably advocate the same, I'd imagine, right? Treating them actually like real employees of the company, not just contractors, even though they are just contractors.
Yeah. And that's why I came up with this model in the first place, is because most of the time people complain so much about, offshore employees suck, they're not very good at this. And then you look at like how you're treating them, and like, I'm going to put you through a third party where only half the money that I pay goes to you. You're going to be treated like an outsider. You're not going to get things like vacation. And then people are shocked when people aren't super dedicated, or you're not attracting a high performer. So,
not even half. The guy I hired as a project manager, the guy's working as a project manager right now. He's one of my best people. I was paying, this is a Ukrainian firm at the time, back by the Ukraine war started, and I used this company in Ukraine, and I was paying something like $1,200 a month, $1,300 a month, something like that, and they were paying him $100 a month. So that was the margin. I found out that what they were paying us, and I ended up buying him out of his contract, and then employing with me. Now I pay him really well, but yeah, I mean, they some agencies pay these people dirt, which is crazy.
Yeah. Athena, the biggest platform in the EA world, pays about a quarter of what they collect. And, they claim, hey, well, we're managing them, we're training them. But if you ever want to see it go well, like, you have to manage your people, you have to train them. Like, that's the only way they're going to meet your standards. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, that's a big reason why I started this model. Like, that's what I get really excited about, is like, when there's a business owner like you who actually just treats them like another person and gives them all the same benefits, like, this is a world-class job for somebody in the Philippines to be treated well. There's a ton of prestige in the US. Like, they get to work fully remote, which is really hard. Like, commuting is tough. And then they're paid above market. Like, that's the coolest thing. And then you make out like a king, where you get a dedicated employee at a fraction of the cost. Like, that's the coolest.
And there'll be people I know who will like penny pinch on this kind of service and pay the absolute bare minimum And it's like you, David, I got somebody who's been pushing 7 years with me, and similarly, I try to, like, paid time off and stuff like that, and bonuses, right? Like, I'll, routinely give bonuses, right? Because I'm like, this person's helping me run my business. And you can be super competitive and just pay a little bit more, or even even a lot more, but it's still so much cheaper than the alternative, right? So it's like the delta on that is so freaking big that, like, you can overpay your offshore help and have them thrilled and still be saving a shit ton of money. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to get greedy on it. Some people, but to your point earlier about the whole keyboard monitoring and all this stuff, there's a lot of, like, VA firms and stuff that sell on that. That'll be like, oh, we'll track keyboard strokes, we'll track screen time, blah 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 blah, which is just like this such low trust model, where like, if that's what that employer values, then, like, this is just not gonna go well. Like, at the end of the day, they're all people. It's people. We're like, these are humans.
Well, the one thing I'll say as well, because of AI, and I know we haven't really covered AI yet in this conversation, but I've got a buddy of mine that runs a VA firm, Jeff Hunter, and he runs a VA firm. I think he's got like 150 some VAs in the Philippines that he runs, but he's trained them all on AI, and so now basically what he does, he sells these folks that, like, I'm going to install a VA, but this is AI, this is a VA that's fully trained in AI when it comes to content creation, was this, and so now they're doing the work of 2 or 3 or 4 people for the cost of one. So when you combine AI with that cost model, you can pay them really well, and still and get the output of 2 or 3 people instead of just the one, and be huge value for them. It's a matter of actually training them up on it, right? You got to train them because the training resources may not be as great in those areas, so you got to provide a lot of that training, I'd imagine. I'm curious though, Greg, and we're getting towards the end of this conversation, and I want to take this, if you don't mind, a little more personal.
Yeah.
Because I know that you prior to starting Oil Machine, which, by the way, again, it's a great name, great company name. It's a really great company name. You walked away. Yeah, I heard that you walked away from like a $4 million firm as part owner. What happened?
Yeah. So to give a snapshot, so I over the course of my first 4 or 5 years there, I went from being the first recruiter hired. We were a $250,000 firm my first year there. To starting to scale. And the owner really valued freedom, and he was really fair with rewarding the value added. And so after probably 4 or 5 years working together, I approached him and I'm like, hey, I want to own a company someday for all the reasons that it's great. I could go eventually leave to start a business, or you could give me a strong ownership stake. He's like, I like that option. And so I eventually ended up owning about 1/3 of the company. Now, after 10 years there, I went through just a lot of personal life change. And I think I had a lot of eye-opening moments where the world started to look very different to me. And I think what I valued and what really mattered to me looked very different. And I think when I first got into it and we got into bed together, it was all about money. And eventually I realized, like, no, the people matter a lot more. And it was very clear for him that it was all about that first part. It was just about money. And I think it became clear to me that there was such a big gap in values, and we could keep working together. But if I was going to do that, I would have to adopt his values. And that just didn't sit with me. And it was tough, man. It was like walking away from your family, walked away from a lot of money and a lot of opportunity to start over. But it was the right move.
Well, I know that in your content, and I follow your content on LinkedIn. So, by the way, anybody who if you got a value out of this episode, go give Greg a follow, and I'll list that as his LinkedIn URL here in a second. But I always followed your content. You got great content. But the one thing I like about your content is that you do have this sort of ethos, right? Where you're about, quality and humanity, and not just being about the money. And I think it's a bit, and I'm not saying it's intentional necessarily, but it's kind of, you've built that brand around you like that, right? And so, and I'd imagine that it helps people who maybe just heard about you or just learned about you a bit of comfort, because I'm sure a lot of people have been burned by offshore agencies. right? It's really common to be burned by them and or burned by offshore talent in the first place. So do you find having that sort of ethos and being very open about it and transparent about it on LinkedIn, has that helped you in that regard? I'd imagine it has to have.
Yeah, and I think like it doesn't need to be either or, right? It's like it's so easy to like it's all about the money, or we're a nonprofit, it's all about the people. And I think both of those is something like it be both. Like, look, I love living in the mountains in Colorado. That's expensive. Like at the end of the day, I need to make a certain amount of money, and like that's a big part of this business. But I've gone through periods where I made a lot of money, and it was so hollow after a certain point. And the people are, I think, what really gives it richness and fulfillment. And like, that just comes down to treating people like people. And it's really simple. And like, that's filled me up so much more, but then it works out really well where like our annual retention at my last company, was 85% with our offshore team. Our offshore team and our onshore team were almost identical. Our onshore team was like 90% annual retention. So like, that's kind of the cool thing is like, actually by giving a damn about your people, it ends up having a good business return too.
Treating them like real people, were human beings, real families. Yeah, it's a big part of it. Yeah, big part of it. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up here in a minute, but I do want to ask one final question, and this will be a fun one. I want a war story. Give us your funniest or wildest war story in this business, and I'm sure you have at least one.
Ooh, okay. Well, this was just pretty freaking cool. Was and my former business partner, where, you know, I said we have different values, but I have a ton of respect for the guy. So back in the early days, he was on a sales call and with a senior HR leader. And she's like, hey, I heard good things about you guys. It's like, cool. Like, what do you need help with? And he's like, we need to hire an internal recruiter. And he's like, okay, we can do this. And he's like, well, what is this recruiter to be focused on? And she's like, well, we're switching EMRs right now. It's basically just like the electronic system. We need to build out this big team for this. We need to hire like 30 developers. And he's like, I don't know where he pulled this out of his ass, but he's like, have you heard of RPO? And she's like, no, I haven't. Tell me about that. He's like, well, that's actually one of our service offerings. And just on the spot, we had never pitched this before, goes, yeah, we will manage your entire system, hiring start to finish. We'll be able to do way more than an internal recruiter. And he flips it from what would have been maybe a 10K or 20K fee to a 50K a month retainer. And
damn.
And we were just flying like a 4-person company. And yeah, this ended up being, we did well over $1 million in direct billing with this client.
That is crazy. Just goes to show you, sometimes you just got to ask. Just ask the question and offer it. And sometimes they actually say yes, even though you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yep.
Oh, that is amazing. All right, looks like we lost Chris, unfortunately. All right, hopefully he can jump back on. Greg, it was a pleasure, man. Thank you very much for being on the show. It was a great show.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I'm going to let me get your LinkedIn URL. There we go. So if anybody wants to connect with Greg, check out a LinkedIn at, of course, the LinkedIn URL. And his slug is Offshore is a superpower. That's a great slug. Offshore is a superpower. It really is. Yeah, I got to tell you, if you guys are looking for offshore recruiters, reach out to Greg for great things about him. In full disclosure, I have not used the service myself, but I know people who have. It's a great service, great, good quality. Greg's a great guy. So you've been burned by other folks, reach out to Greg. You will not be disappointed. All right. And Greg, my check, you can send me the check in the mail, please. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, brother. Well, I'm just kidding. But that's it, guys. Again, make sure you like the show. Make sure you love it or hate it. We don't care. We just want your emotion for the good old algorithm. So make sure you comment live, comment replay. And with that said, we'll see you next time. Greg, thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.